When we saw Last Chance U was back on Netflix, we thought we got to get back into this, right? We loved the first few seasons that were out there, but now we turned to basketball. And we figured, let's jump on this and make this part of the show. Let's go recap these episodes as we go through. Today, we're kicking it all off. We're going episodes 1 and 2. We're looking forward to seeing how this season transpires, how these players turn the corner, whether they do or not, how the coach manages everything. It's going to be a lot of fun, so come along for the ride.
This is Distant Replay.
So another season of Last Chance U is now out on Netflix. You've probably seen it. It's being featured in the new releases, but it's now shifted gears from football to basketball. So this grabbed our attention, and we want to make it the focus of, I don't know how many episodes we're going to do, Mike, but we want to kind of recap this documentary. We're going to start today with episodes 1 and 2 based on kind of feedback we get, how many people check out the episode. We might go episode by episode because I think as we get into this, each episode will probably get a little more in depth and a little more detail. We might need to spend a little more time on it. But I think episode 1 is kind of a very surface level episode, so there's not as much to get into. So we'll combine that with episode 2, which I thought was really good, and combine those together and kick off with that. What do you think?
That sounds like a good game plan. Yeah, and this episode, very much surface level, getting us acclimated with where we are and who we're dealing with this season.
If you haven't joined us before, you can find our website, distantreplaypodcast.com. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Instagram and on YouTube as well. If you ever have an idea for a show, send it to us. We'll put it on the list and make it happen. We're doing about three episodes a week. We're doing an old game we go back to. We're doing a documentary recap and a true crime sports episode. So those 3 we're doing every single week. So we're on documentary recap now, and it's Last Chance U. How much did you watch Last Chance U? Because this series really kind of took off, and it was one of the big Netflix series early on when it first released, 4 or 5 years ago now, when they were spotlighting junior college football in Mississippi. Did you get into that?
I did, yeah. So those are the only seasons that I watched very intently, were the East Mississippi Community College ones with Buddy Stevens, right? Because if you remember the previews for that, they had Buddy Stevens, who's a character, and then they had Swag Kelly, who's, even though he's not in the season, they just had him in the preview, and I was like, well, I'm watching this show. So I never miss a chance for some Swag Kelly, you know that.
Of course not.
That's Chad Kelly, for those of you who don't know, former Mississippi quarterback. He attended that junior college. But, yeah, so I watched those 2 seasons pretty intently. Admittedly, I have not watched any season since.
Yeah, and do you remember Brittany Wagner? Because she's the one that really, along with the players, she kind of rose to fame because she was dealing with all these guys in school, and she had a really good approach to it, was very welcoming to these kids, and had to deal with a lot to get these guys into school, because that's the biggest issue with many of these guys in junior college is they don't want to go to class.
She's kind of stole the show. Now that I'm thinking about it, she was a major character in that first season, and definitely was one of the people that put the show on the map.
Yeah, and she's since kind of broken off from that, and she's kind of built her own brand around that. So good for her. But that's probably where you've heard of this series before. And they featured a few other schools as well. Definitely Buddy Stevens is the original, the OG to the series. But now we shift to basketball. And I'm very interested in this one too, Mike, because not only do we have a shift in sports, but we have a shift in region. And you go from the Deep South to East Los Angeles, it is night and day.
Oh, yeah. And even just the setting of the college is completely different. It's in the middle of a city. We're dealing with a 35,000 student community college, which I had never heard of. Are you familiar with community colleges that are that big?
No. East Los Angeles is the school. 35,000. That's a major university. That's huge.
It is, and they go through the unique challenges though that these kids have being at East LA College, where it's largely a commuter school. Right. There's no dorms, there's no meal plans, there's no structure outside of the basketball program, and I think it's a big reason why you see the coach use some of the tactics he has. Like, for instance, the only day they have off the entire season is Christmas Day.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes these series so good, is you get to see truly, how difficult competing in these sports can be, but also for these coaches, guys that truly love the game and have a passion for working with kids. It takes a special person to be in this situation, especially when you find out that, John Mosley, who's the head coach and really a big focus of not only the series, but this first episode, kind of giving us a background on who he is and how he got to this job. But guy got a $15,000 stipend to take this position in Los Angeles. Mike, how far do you think $15,000 will go? I mean, give me a break.
And this guy has a family too.
Yeah.
He has a family. He's a legend at East LA College, which is probably important to mention, which is probably why he feels an affinity towards that school. He was a point guard there. And when they said that was one of the eye-popping moments, $15,000 stipend to coach initially, then he gets a tenured position and the pay raise that comes, a tenured professor position,
right,
and the pay raise that comes along with it. But this guy is teaching. He teaches 6 classes at, 18-hour course load. So he's not just, teaching, theory of basketball and then just coaching basketball the rest of the time. He's doing spin classes, weight training classes, 18 hours a week. And in Mosley's tenure, we find out right away that there's high expectations because they've been very successful. He took over a program that wasn't good. They've been very successful, but they've never won that elusive California, junior college championship.
Yep. You kind of get the impression that he's a guy known as is a great coach, but can't win the big one. Right? There's a few of those coaches you automatically think of, but I guess in this kind of environment, junior college ranks in California, that's kind of the rep he's gotten, fair or not. But I mean, you look at what he deals with and all these guys at this level, Mike, I think the biggest thing you learn about these guys is not only they're doing it because they love it and they're not getting paid much, but the job's already tough enough from that aspect. But then you're dealing with guys that however they got to this point in their career, many times they're guys that have much higher ambitions and expectations that feel like they're above being in the spot. And then you have to deal with those personalities on top of everything else.
Yeah, you're dealing with their last chance, right? So that's why this show is so appropriate. Yeah, you like that? That's why it's so appropriately named. And they said there's 3 reasons why in this show. They said there's 3 reasons why people go to a junior college.
Yeah, I love it.
Athletically, for athletics, academically, because they need to get up to standards academically, and because they are assholes.
Yeah.
Right? Those are the 3. And look, if you think about the previous Last Chance U seasons, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Right? And managing the temperament of these players who we get introduced to in this episode as well, and keeping them on task, keeping them on track, I think is especially hard in this East LA environment because of the fact that you don't have that typical even community college infrastructure around them.
Yep, exactly. So Coach Mosley, big focus. We'll get into him a lot more as we move along. I think what was interesting is we kind of go through some of our favorite moments from this, and we'll kind of introduce a few of the players and some thoughts on those guys. But we automatically right out of the gates get introduced to Joe Hampton, who we don't know who he is right away, but we see this huge tantrum being thrown in the locker room when a guy's not getting his way on the court, and you're just kind of like, wow. Yeah, because you don't see this, and it's pointed out, during these first 2 episodes by assistant coach Rob Robinson, that D1 guys don't have to deal with this. They're not going to. But at this level, you got to do it, and it set the stage. Like, there's a lot of personality and a lot of emotions that are going to be on display throughout this thing.
Yeah, and Joe Hampton explains to us the difference between a hooper and a basketball player.
Have you ever
Did you
heard
know
that
the
before?
difference before he explained it or no?
No, I guess I could probably, if you said, hey, man, what's the difference, between a basketball player and somebody that's a hooper? I could probably figure it out and explain it to you. But I've never heard, somebody get classified in one of those 2. I mean, I guess I was probably a basketball player, Mike.
Yeah, me too. So the difference is, for those who maybe don't remember or haven't listened or haven't watched it yet, a hooper is someone who could get you a bucket. Like, your team needs a bucket, you give him the ball, he can get you a bucket. Sort of like the alpha of the team. A basketball player is just someone who, knows the game, maybe pretty good, is fundamentally sound, but he's not a hooper. He can't get you a bucket. Right. So that we find that out from Joe Hampton, what the difference is there.
We'll get into Joe a little bit more because he was mainly the focus of episode 2, but we get introduced to him a little bit in this episode. What players kind of caught your attention is we kind of touched on a handful of guys in this first episode, kind of introduced them to us kind of briefly, right? We don't know a ton about their stories, but we kind of get an idea of who all is going to be involved.
Yeah, right away, what I look for in these episodes is what one of these guys So I try not to Google while I'm watching the show. I want it to unfold.
Can't do it. Yeah, you can't do it.
Yeah, but which one of these guys is going to be a high major guy if he's not already? Because this show takes place a couple of years ago. And in this show, to me, the two that I have my eye on as we head into later episodes are KJ Allen and Malik Muhammad. KJ Allen, they go through how he won the Naismith Award for being the best player in the city of LA. And he's basically only at East LA College because his grades weren't up to par to get a Division I scholarship. Mm-hmm. So, you look at a guy who's a player of the year in the city of LA. So that's the kind of talent level we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
And then at Malik Muhammad, same thing. We didn't get much on his backstory, except for the fact that he kind of floats in and floats out, comes right on time to practice. That was a funny scene. He flips the switch on whenever he needs to, though, and he's wildly talented. So those are the two guys I have my eye on.
Yeah, it was funny because Coach was like, yeah, we have a 3 o'clock practice. He gets here at 2:59. He plays hard and practices hard, but he doesn't do anything extra. And I think that's kind of like this. That's kind of probably a running theme and a running quality for a lot of these guys is, they haven't done the extras, right? The extra work. Like there's a ton that goes into making it to that next level. You got the talent, but that's like just one piece of it. And you kind of get that sense here. But yeah, Muhammad looks pretty good. Another guy that I'm curious about is Deshaun Highler, the guard who's kind of the captain of the team and seems to kind of be a leader of this team and have a pretty good attitude, but he's dealing with the loss of his parents. We find out he lost both his mom and his dad. And now kind of Coach Mosley's kind of the father figure to him. And because of that, he's looked on as kind of having a negative attitude and kind of being like that third A, the asshole on the team. But I think it was pretty eye-opening. It was like when the producer asked him, hey, do you think that's a fair description of you? And he's like, no, I think I'm just going through the toughest time of my life. And you hear that and you're like, man, you look back on this and this is the toughest time. He's a year removed from both of his parents dying essentially. And he's trying to cope with that in a large city, in an environment with really no support system and trying to go through all that. You kind of see where he's coming from.
Yeah, the initial impression I get of Deshaun Highler is that he's pretty mature for his age.
Yeah.
Maybe because of what he's been through. And that if he is an a-hole, I didn't really see it in the first episode. I guess we'll see.
Well, I think
we'll see what happens as it unfolds.
They show some scenes on the court, right, where he's like kind of being a bit of a dick to other guys and like, making fun of people and like stuff like that, right? Kind of superficial stuff. But, I think that's kind of what Coach was referring to. They showed a few clips like that. But yeah, it seems like he's a pretty down to earth. Like I think well mature is a pretty good description. He seemed like that and kind of get that sense as you go through it. So those are a few of the players. Obviously, Joe Hampton will get into a little bit more, who is actually a transfer in from Penn State, and we kind of learn about that a little bit. But you see a lot more about him in episode 2. But yeah, I think that's a pretty good start of who the key figures in this are going to be, and you kind of see a lot of that early on. But yeah, I think to me, Allen kind of stands out in terms of his abilities and what he like the clips they show of him, the hops that he has, and he can jump through the gym. And it's impressive to watch him play. You got to kind of wondering, what's it going to take for him to get to that next level? And you learn grades are kind of an issue. What else from this episode 1, scene-wise, did you really enjoy?
So 4 of the players live in a 1-bedroom apartment together. Mm-hmm. And just them playing video games. The house is a mess. They're talking about how much they love not living at home and living on their own. They're talking junk about their coach, just like kind of real college, Yeah. That's what college. That's what college is, Your house is a mess. You're playing video games, and you're talking about how awesome it is,
Yeah, pretty much. I loved one of our first, really before we know much about Joe Hampton. He's talking smack to his coach, right? Because he feels like he's God's gift, right? But he's talking about his game and whatever else, and he's like, let me hit this half court shot, coach. If I hit it, you want to run? Make a deal, right? If I hit it, you run. If I miss it, I'll run. And coach is like, yeah, of course. You're not going to hit a half-court shot. And then dude bangs it. Just straight splash from midcourt. And like the reaction to coach going down to the floor laughing and the team going crazy. I thought that was a pretty cool moment.
Yeah, Joe Hampton, I'm interested to see what happens in the rest of the season because he is up and down. 1 minute he's laughing, making a half-court shot. 1 minute he's saying, I'm thankful for this opportunity I have. Yeah. And the other minute he's going, like you said, on temper tantrums, demeaning the players on his own team.
Right.
So I think he's going to be a roller coaster, assuming he makes it the full season here.
Yeah, because you can see the talent he has. I mean, when you watch him play, he can move for a big man. And I'm very curious to see how it all transpires with him as well. I also love the end of this episode. So, like, we're kind of going through the season, right? Following this entire season, trying to get to the playoffs, see if they can win that championship. So it kind of starts off, they're playing Rio Hondo, which, by the way, sounds like a Street Fighter character. Wasn't there like a Rio Honda or something like that back in the day?
There was Piston Honda on Mike Tyson's Punch-Out.
Okay, maybe that's who it is. But you got Rio Hondo, which is a great name. These guys come in having won basically, 3 games so far, and like they're kind of treated as like a laughingstock in the area. And they come in here and they kind of look like a junior college team you'd expect, right? Some smaller kids, a little more diminutive. They got this one kid, this white boy that comes out that looks like he might start on a high school team, right? When you see him, he doesn't intimidate you, but he comes out and he's just dropping buckets out of the gates, and it's just like, holy cow, this team, this Rio Hondo team, who's barely not any good, is making it look pretty easy on these guys.
Yeah, and they make it look, you know how these episodes are. They make everything look dramatic,
Right.
So they make it look like, this Rio Hondo team could actually pull the upset off, and then at the end they lose by 30. So, but it was those scenes when this kid was sort of breaking them down and score, and he actually had a decent amount of points in that first half. This kid that Ben was talking about, and their reaction to this kid putting up points on them was great.
That dude probably loved this episode too, by the way. He's got to have this thing saved, right?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. Oh yeah,
amazing.
This is his one shining moment.
But you kind of get a sense of what Coach Mosley has to deal with out of this, because he comes into halftime. He's just like, look, I mean, I don't have anything to tell you guys. It's just effort. I mean, how do y'all want this season to end, right? How do you want your career to go? It's up to you guys. I mean, it's kind of like this. I mean, no yelling, no screaming. And we saw this guy can yell and scream. He can get after him. He knows kind of when to turn it on, when to turn it off, kind of message to send them. And they respond and they close it out with a pretty easy win. But we get a little introduction to everybody in this and kind of what's to come. But what we do know is that this team is really talented, has a couple D1 prospects on it, but there's a lot to manage for Coach Mosley and his staff, which has Rob Robinson on it, and Kenneth Hunter is the coach that works out of the wheelchair. Both seem like good dudes, also seem like they care a lot about it, but a lot of dirty work to be done and a lot of small tasks that they have to deal with day to day.
Couldn't agree more. And some other little tidbits from this episode. The soundtrack is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
The soundtrack is great.
Dude, I love it. The LA music from the 90s, like a lot of it.
It's great. Yeah, it's awesome.
So awesome. So that's episode 1. Let's go into episode 2. As we mentioned, trying to do both these episodes together. We'll maybe split them up as we move forward. But episode 2 is pretty much a Joe Hampton episode. So we learn a lot more about Joe in this episode and kind of get a pretty good feel for who he is. Because we saw the tantrum to begin, and we actually get our first flashback to when he joined the team, his tryout, and how he got to this point. We learn he was huge, played at Oak Hill, and if you might follow high school basketball, Oak Hill has produced a ton of talented players. They document some of them in this episode, but some NBA stars have come out of Oak Hill, and if you play in that program, it's basically like they recruit kids there. If you play in that prep academy, you're pretty good and got a pretty good chance. And he was like a top 50 recruit coming out of high school and ends up at Penn State, dealing with some issues. He had a knee issue in high school, has another knee issue in college that requires a surgery. And they said he went down a road of just like smoking all the time and not working, not putting in any time on his game, and basically just kind of fell apart and quit. And you kind of get that sense like, okay, first bit of adversity, this guy just kind of hung it up and moved back out to California, where he was looking for life after basketball already at like probably 19 years old, and gets into some trouble with he kind of downplayed it, but it sounded like some kind of robbery or theft, and then bank fraud. I don't know what bank fraud, what he actually did that would classify as bank fraud for him, but he's serving an actual prison sentence literally up until a week before he tries out, which that was like, wow, this guy was literally just in prison to the basketball court.
Yeah, he literally just slid that in. So what happened is he went from Penn State to another junior college in L.A., then got into the legal trouble Ben mentioned, and is literally in jail. The charges he was facing, he could have been in jail for 2 or 3 years. He ends up being in jail for, I think it was like 3 weeks, because the coach, Mosley, vouched for him and got him out of jail.
which is amazing.
Is what Joe Hampton made it sound like. I mean, this is a kid that
he wrote the judge a letter, to make the sentence a little more lenient.
And this is a kid that Mosley barely knows, but wants to give him a second shot. And if you look at Joe Hampton's attitude throughout these first 2 episodes, I don't want to say he's not appreciative of what Mosley did for him, but I think he forgets it from time to time.
Yeah, that's the big story with him, man. Is like you touched on already. Like one moment he's like, I don't know when these interviews are happening, right? Because one moment he's like, man, I'm just appreciative of this opportunity, just trying to take advantage because I know that I can get to that next level, and I know I should be taking care of my family already by this point. That's where I thought I would be. To then you see him on the court and in a game, and he just kind of expects everything to be given to him. You know, when he's on the bench, not starting or not playing, he's talking about how his teammates are no good, and how he doesn't get the ball when he's out there. And dude, it's tough to pull for him watching this episode.
It is. He's dealing with the reality of a big time player being completely humbled and being at a JUCO to like the nth degree, right? And he's not handling it well. It's probably the best way to put it. He's openly, I mean, the way he openly criticizes his teammates on the court, when he's on the bench, out loud, I mean, his teammates have a lot of patience with him.
Dude, I was like, how far removed am I from being on a team, like playing team sports? Because I could never imagine that kind of thing being tolerated. But then you kind of remember like what the situation is, and you know, Coach Robinson, which I love the guy, right? He's in there trying to give these guys any kind of college experience they can by hanging up their practice jerseys on their locker room in their tiny, you know, locker room with some old leather couches and whatever else, just trying to give them any kind of feel for, you know, being taken care of and being a priority. But he's like, listen, man, everybody's turned their back on this kid. We're not going to do that. Like, he's got to figure out that his future's in his hands, right? It's up to him. We got to just continue to work with him. And God bless guys like that, man, because it's tough for me to have the patience to stick it out with somebody that you see obviously got himself into this position and continues to just double down on just quitting as soon as the first thing goes wrong with him. And sure, some of those calls on the court did not seem great, and it seemed like they just kept adding on, and I could see it. But to walk off because calls weren't going your way in a game, and then literally just go to the locker room and just walk and just leave mid-game. I mean, how many schools could keep a guy around like that?
Yeah, and you know what made him look worse in this episode, Ben, is the profiles of the 2 players in this episode were Hampton predominantly, but they also profiled a lot of KJ Allen.
Yeah.
And it was bad look for Joe Hampton to have KJ Allen in the same episode as him sort of getting a lot of the shine, because KJ Allen is the polar opposite of Joe Hampton. He's about twice as good a player. He's polar opposite in terms of attitude. Mm-hmm. It went through a lot of Allen's relationship with his mother and father, which is a very good one. Allen's a very hard worker. It's just his issue is academics come very hard for him, but not because of a lack of effort.
Yeah.
So you feel for a kid like KJ Allen, who could be at a high major Division I. Again, we're talking about a former Los Angeles high school player of the year before. And he is like wildly talented. And so is Joe Hampton, you know, especially for a guy who was coming off of 2 very serious injuries his senior year of high school and his freshman year at Penn State. But they could not approach, you know, this second chance they're getting any differently.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because it just kind of speaks to how we treat people and look at people in general in life, right? The squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? That's the expression. And like when I listen to this episode or watch this episode and think back on it, like I'm only thinking about Hampton because he's the one that's the loudest, right? He's the one getting the most attention, when Allen is also kind of spotlighted quite a bit in this episode and just kind of goes about his business, takes care of it, has a good attitude, is, you know, just kind of goes with the flow and just performs in the court, but, you know, doesn't make a scene, you know, isn't loud, isn't obnoxious, and you kind of forget about him. But that's just kind of how life is, and it sucks that it's like that, and you think about it like that. But it's a good point, because I'd almost kind of forgotten that how much he was involved in this episode. But both these guys are uber talented, and you can see their future. And there's some guys scouting them, and they even had a scout come out to watch practice. And in that practice, and it's a small, you know, one of these California colleges, small school, but still an opportunity. and they're asking about Hampton, and meanwhile he's having to run, baselines, and he's not getting back in time because he's just doing a half-assed job at it because he's trying to make a point to coach. Until finally his teammates even try to run with him, and he just kind of brushes them off. They try to support him, and eventually, after like 4 or 5 times, he gets it and then just goes to the locker room and quits. And it's just like, dude, this is a perfect example of an impression you could be making, but you can't see the big picture.
Yeah, it's example of this. As of now in this season, I hope he turns it around. I'm rooting for him. Because, again, they make a very big point in this episode of saying as well is they don't want to give up for him because if they give up on him, he doesn't have anything else. Mm-hmm. So that's an aspect to this where a Division I program may say, hey, get lost. They have a little bit more of a tolerance for this kind of stuff at this level of basketball. But, again, what Mosley says is the delicate balance he has to strike here where he can't let a guy like Hampton disrupt all the chemistry he has and get to that ultimate goal that the team has of winning that California State Championship. It's a very delicate balance, and these coaches, to me, I have a background in coaching. I've never coached in a situation like this, but you have enough on your plate dealing with the X's and O's, getting your team ready to play, to then have to deal with all this other ancillary stuff that they deal with, and there's only 3 of them, coach-wise.
Yeah.
Tough road.
Yeah, they have very little time to deal with all that stuff. But they have to manage it, and that's it. What other scenes from this episode 2 did you really like? I mean, it's all about Hampton. We can go into his attitude quite a bit. But I want to see how this unfolds as we move forward. Yeah, I mean, I want to see how he unfolds. Obviously, I'd like to get a little more background on, in depth on a Deshaun Highler, on a Malik Muhammad, maybe get to know the coaches' backstories a little bit more, and most importantly, see how this season ends up for this team. Yeah, I'm going to do my best not to Google anything on the players, on the outcome of the season. And this was what, 2019 season? It was, guessing? Yeah, I believe so, yeah. Yeah, you can't, when you watch these, you can't Google. It ruins the whole season. Right. It would ruin the whole TV show. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can, but yeah, you won't enjoy it nearly as much. So, well, I'm looking forward to it, Mike. We'll see how this thing goes. We'll do this every week. We might go episode by episode, depending on what's in it. Might combine a couple episodes like we did today with episode 1 and 2. But you can find it all on Netflix. It's out now. Last Chance U, featuring East LA College, 35,000 enrollment for this community college. Wild. Pretty impressive. Anything else? Make sure you subscribe because that's the best way to keep on top of the other recaps we put out for this series here. And we'll put a ending screen that will link to the other Last Chance U recap episodes that we do. Yeah. But the best way to keep track is to subscribe either on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast. Absolutely. That is a way to do it. And we look forward to going through these. We have plenty more episodes to come. We got games we're recapping, also true crime, sports. We got a series on that as well. So 3 episodes a week. We're cranking out, and we appreciate all the feedback. But subscribe, review, leave us a rating wherever you listen to. It helps us out a lot, so we do appreciate that. So, Mike, looking forward to this, man. This is going to be fun to track these guys and Coach Mosley. Yeah, this is off to a great start, and I can't wait for episode 3 and beyond. Until next time.